Hi, and welcome back to yet another SolidWorks tutorial. Exercise number 4 is a fun one. This is a paperclip. While it may seem like a simple everyday object, it presents an interesting challenge when we are in the world of solid modeling. Here, we're going to introduce a sweep. Let's take a look at the underlying sketches that create our paperclip model. First sketch in the series is actually the sketch of the path that the extrusion will follow. This very much just looks like the shape of a paperclip, except it has no thickness. These are just simply lines. This was actually all drawn using one line command, and again, as we step through this, you'll understand how we do that. It's made up of these tangent arcs. The tangency is really important here at each of these intersections, and you'll see how we do that when we create that line with the tangent arc. Obviously, we have a lot of the horizontal relationships here that exist. This outside diameter is 3.5, radius of 3.5. There's a distance of 4 between these two endpoints. The overall length is 32. From the origin point to this outside edge, we have a length of 10. And these guys are 1.5 apart from one another. Overall, again, it was you created using one line sketch, so it happened rather quickly, added a few dimensions, and we're good to go. So this is just one of 2 sketches required for the paperclip. Let's go ahead now and take a look at the second sketch. Our second sketch in this particular model is a very, very simple one. It's just a circle. The key here is that this circle has to be on a plane that's perpendicular to the path. And that's because we're going to take this circle and extrude it along this path. That's a really important step. And before we even start any of the sketches, we want to make sure that we understand this relationship. So that's why the origin here is so key. Being able to deposit that circle right at the end point, the center of that circle at the end point of our path, is very important. So from the onset, I knew that I would be generating this sketch. That's why I started the path at that point, and I did that on the top plane. So now we have this intersecting right plane that gives us that perpendicular profile to follow along. The profile here is just the cross-sectional geometry of the paperclip, which happens to be a circle. And it's that profile that will be extruded along the path to create this solid body. Let's get started drawing our paperclip. So in SolidWorks, I've opened up a new file and I've changed my units to mmgs, millimeters, grams, seconds. Now I'm going to start, like all SolidWorks drawings, with a sketch. So I click the sketch tab, I click the sketch button, and I want my paperclip to sit on the ground, so I'm going to create the path here on the top plane. So I select the top plane, and now I'm going to invoke the line tool. Click on line tool, I'm going to click at the origin point, and I'm going to pull a line horizontal. The key with this actually is we're going to do this all with one line command. So after I've drawn that line and I've clicked that second point, before I move my mouse at all, I'm going to type A on the keyboard. What that's going to do is move to a tangent arc, and I want to sketch. I'm not actually like clicking anything. I've clicked and let go. But I want to pull that arc along a path, because if you go back to the center point and I just pull out like this, it's going to start an arc that looks different from how I want it to look. So what I need to do is I need to tell SolidWorks, I want this arc to go like this. I do that. I bring that arc up until I see that blue dotted connector line. I'm going to click. I'm going to pull that line out and a nice horizontal. I click. Before I move the mouse, I type A again, and I sketch out the direction of that arc until I see that blue connection point. Click and pull away. Another horizontal line. I'm going to go past that arc at the end. Click. I'm going to type A yet again without moving the mouse, and I'm going to sketch this guy out. Now, again, I really want that blue connector line between, but I'm going to show you what happens if I miss that. So you'll notice that I don't see that blue extension line. I'm going to move it back just a little bit, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to pull out my line from there, another horizontal line. I see that blue connector line connecting it, the extension line connecting it to the origin, so I'm going to click to position it there, and hit escape to get out of the line command. So when we're looking at this, you'll notice that we have all of these horizontal lines. That's good. We have tangent, 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 tangent. Oops, no tangent here. I don't have a tangent here because I didn't pull that point till I saw the blue extension line, so that won't make that a tangent connection. I did that on purpose because I want to show you now how to create a relationship where one might not exist. So to do that, it's actually quite simple. Make sure that no tool is active, so you don't have the line command or dimension tool. And I simply click the two things I want to create a relationship between. So in this case, I'm going to click this top line. I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'm going to click the arc. The control just allows me to select more than one object. When I do that, it pops up this little menu above my mouse key, and you'll see all of the potential relationships that you can add to that. So here, the first one in the top left is make tangent, which is what I want to do. If we look over here on the left-hand side of our screen, you'll notice that those same add relations exist here on the left. So if for some reason that menu doesn't pop up or you miss it, you can always go over here and simply click on tangent and hit the green check mark. And that's going to add that tangent relationship to that curve. That's really important because without that, those 2 points won't work together nicely. So that's it. It was one line command, a couple tangent arcs included by typing A to invoke arc as part of that. And all of my sketching is done. All of my relations now exist. And now it's just a matter of adding dimensions. So, of course, Smart Dimension Tool is my best friend. The key with this particular project is the dimensions happen on the arcs from the midpoint of the arc. So, for example, if we looked at the sketch that I showed at the beginning of the tutorial video, the length of 32 actually happens from this point to this point here. If you were trying to dimension that and you click this line and then click that line as your second dimension point, notice where it's dimensioning from. It's dimensioning from the center of those arcs. We don't want that dimension to be from the center of the arcs. We want it to be from the outside edge of the arc. So here I'm going to hit escape and hit escape a second time. I'm still in the dimension tool, but this time I'm going to hover over the arc. You'll see the midpoint shows up, and I'm going to hover over the midpoint till it turns orange and click to select it. You'll notice now I have that blue dot positioned there, and I'm going to come over here to this edge, do the exact same thing till that midpoint is selected, click, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a length of 32. So that locks that in. The next thing I want to do is do the same thing here. I'm going to click this midpoint on this arc, repeat that process, this midpoint on this arc. This wants to have a distance of 4. And we're going to do the same sort of thing here. I'm going to select the origin point, and this time that midpoint on the arc, and that's going to give me that distance between those two, which in this case happens to be 10. So those are the complicated dimensions. Those are things that we haven't done in past tutorials using that midpoint on the arc. You can also dimension to midpoint of lines if you want to. The extra dimensions here, we have a dimension between the first line we drew and the bottom line, and that has a distance of 1.5 millimeters. And that same distance exists between these top two. So I select this line and this line. I'm going to dimension between those guys, and I want those to be 1.5 as well. So with that, you'll see that I still have a lot of blue lines. if I hit escape to get out of the dimension tool, I can start to grab these arcs and try to move them around and be like, oh yeah, this really does change. So I need to add at least a couple more dimensions to lock this in. The last big missing dimension is actually a radius on one of these curves, and we're going to use this outside curve. So I'm going to invoke the Smart Dimension tool again, click on this outside curve, and I'm going to do a radius of 3.5 millimeters here. And you'll notice that one dimension turns all of those lines from blue to black. So it was really that outstanding one. Now, if you're paying close attention to our model here, everything looks like it's black and it says underdefined, but if you're really paying attention, you'll notice the endpoint here is blue. Again, if I get out of the dimension tool and I click on that line, it's blue because I can move this back and forth in or out, longer or smaller. So we could add a second dimension from that point to this edge and make it 10 because it should line up with this point. Typically, when you dimension the same value twice in a drawing in SolidWorks, there's probably a better way to do it. In this case, the better way is rather than dimension this point, create a relationship between this point and that point. So we've already shown how to do that. That point's selected. I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to select my origin point, and then I'm going to come over here, and these are the relationship choices I have: horizontal, vertical, fixed, or merge. I clearly don't want to merge those 2 points. I also don't want to fix them. I don't want them horizontal to one another. Vertical is the proper option here. So I select vertical, and I hit the checkbox. Once I do that, that point turns black, and we now have a fully defined object. With that, I'm done with this sketch, and I can go ahead and exit the sketch. Now, as I mentioned, we have to have 2 separate sketches for our paperclip model. One has to be on the top plane. The next one we want to be on a plane that's perpendicular to that top plane. If you don't know which one that is, you can always scroll through them on the left. They show up here. So front plane, that's not perpendicular to that point. Top plane, that's what we drew it on already. The right plane is the proper plane that we want to draw on. So with that, I'm now going to go up and create a second sketch. Here's the key to this little exercise, and something that people miss quite easily. Because sketch 1 is highlighted here in my history, if I click the sketch button, it's not going to create a new sketch. It's simply going to open up that existing sketch. I don't want to open up that existing sketch. This sketch is done. So I'm going to exit that sketch, and I'm going to make sure that no sketch is highlighted by hitting the escape key to deselect that sketch. Now I can go up to click the sketch button to initiate a new sketch. Here, those stock planes don't show up. How will I choose that right plane, which I've already determined I need? Well, to get to those, we haven't really explored this, but up here in the top left corner of your drawing window, where it says Part 4, because this is the 4th thing I've drawn today, if I click on that little arrow next to it, it brings up my design history, and you can go in and select any of those previous things you've dealt with in your design history. So this is a great way to make selections of features when you don't have your design tree up. You can just click that little arrow and expose them. And here, again, I'm going to choose the right plane for that sketch. So I choose the right plane. SolidWorks hasn't orbited that plane normal to my drawing surface, and with this particular example, I don't really want to go normal to that drawing surface because I want to be able to show you the perpendicular nature of this sketch. So I'm going to click my view orientation, and I'm just going to go to the isometric here, and I can zoom in, and we're going to go to the center circle option. The center of my circle is going to be positioned at the origin point. So I click that and pull away. I move to my Smart Dimension tool, and I'm going to dimension the outside edge of that circle. And this wants to have a diameter of 1. So I simply type in 1 and hit enter, and that locks in that thing. Again, this sketch is now fully defined. It's black. There's nothing else we need to do to it, so I can go ahead and exit the sketch. So I've exited the sketch. I have my two sketches are now visible. One is currently highlighted. You make sure you have two sketches over here in your design history. At this stage, we're ready to do our sweep. So I'm going to move over to the Features tab, and instead of an extrude or revolve, I now go to the Swept Boss Base. Click on Swept Boss Base, and the menu pops up. Because the nature of how you typically draw in SolidWorks, it usually takes whatever your last sketch was and makes that the profile. It's just what SolidWorks does. If for some reason that's not correct, you can always right-click on that and do clear selections, and you'll notice that that's now highlighted blue, and I can go in and select that profile. This second box here is the path. It's asking you to indicate the path. So because it's highlighted blue, it's now asking for a selection set. I could either go in here and choose any line on that path, or like we did with that plane, I can click the little arrow to expose that, and I can choose sketch one. Either one is an option. I like just going over here and choosing a line on that path. It then does that sweep for me. If I'm happy with it, which I am, I can go ahead and hit the checkbox. You'll notice there's a lot of other options here. All these things that make SolidWorks really powerful. You can do guide curves so that instead of this just staying at a constant diameter, you can actually make it go in or out or get larger. There's a great exercise where you make like a trumpet that way, or the bell of a trumpet, by creating a guide curve that bell follows. But in this case, the paperclip, it just keeps that same profile all the way through, so there's no reason to add any of those other things. I'm going to hit the green check mark, and lo and behold, we have created our paperclip. That concludes our exercise number 4. Hopefully you found this helpful and gives you another tool in your arsenal as you approach solid modeling using SolidWorks. Thanks for tuning in, and keep checking the channel for additional tutorials.